Next thing you know, his window come down. And I ain't seen a gun that big. All you see is fire.
From what I understand, they never met up with you ahead of time to really get your story or hire you as a consultant or anything else like that. Is that right?
They tried to. When they made that video, OG Layton Simon, they was like, you know, kind of coming at me a little bit then, you know. Don't nobody controls Detroit. Not just no one person. You know what I'm saying? What I'm talking about? I ran.
You thought Lamar Silas was bad? Think again. On BMF, he was shown singing before a murder, forcing enemies to eat trash, and strangling his partner.
Hey, you can't stop the rain. Oh!
But those were just TV scenes. The real man behind the character, Layton the Beast Simon, was not a made-up villain.
We also had to worry about Layton every 5 minutes. Not like the boogeyman is coming. Layton's a boogeyman. He gonna come.
His fight with Big Meech and BMF came from family ties, street wars, and real tragedies. The truth about his life is much darker than what the show ever showed. The fiction, building a TV monster. And yet, to understand the myth, you first have to see how it was built. Most people don't know the name Layton Simon, but they know the shadow he inspired Lamar Silas. When Lamar appeared on the BMF series, he wasn't just another TV gangster. He was designed to terrify, to crawl under your skin. Played by the British-Ghanaian actor Eric Kofi-Abrefa, Lamar quickly became one of the most talked about characters on television, and it wasn't by accident. Every detail of his creation was chosen to turn him into something larger than life. The writers made a deliberate decision about his return. Lamar doesn't step out of prison. He steps out of a psychiatric hospital. That single change separated him from every other street character. It branded him immediately as unstable, unpredictable, and unhinged. A man driven by violence, yes, but also by madness.
Stay away from my next time I won't miss.
From the moment his cousin Alvin picked him up, Lamar's obsession was clear. He wanted it all back. His woman, his turf, and his old crew. In his mind, the years hadn't changed anything, but Detroit had changed. The city was burning in the late 80s, factories shutting down, whole neighborhoods collapsing into poverty and drugs. In that chaos, the Flannery brothers Meech and Terry had already taken over the streets Lamar once controlled. To him, they weren't businessmen or visionaries. They were kids who had stolen his crown, and that couldn't stand. The first thing he did was make the city feel his presence. At the big Coney Island restaurant, he smashed a manager's head into the counter and delivered the message that Detroit had been dreading. Lamar Silas is back in town.
When you see Duke, you tell him that Lamar Silas is back in town.
That moment set the tone. Lamar wasn't coming back quietly. He wanted everyone to know that the nightmare had returned. From there, the show threw him directly into Meech's path. Lamar arrives at Monique's home, only to find Meech there. Tension filled the room. The meeting ended outside, where Lamar bumper-checked Meech's car and warned him to back off. That small, almost childish move carried weight. It was the start of a street war that would define the season. But Lamar's genius wasn't just in violence. It was in how he manipulated loyalty. The 12th Street Boys, once his crew, were leaderless with J-Mo gone. Lamar saw the vacuum and filled it with terror. He worked with Slick, an old friend, to split the crew from the inside. And then he went after Phil Mel, J-Mo's right-hand man. The alley ambush was brutal. Lamar crushed him with a paint can and left him for dead in a dumpster. But the hospital visit was worse. Lamar stood over the barely breathing Phil Mel, grabbed his face, and whispered the ultimate threat. Leave Detroit forever or die. By the time Phil Mel limped out of town, Lamar was back in full control.
And you take a road trip for the rest of your life.
This was the part of the show that made him unforgettable. Lamar wasn't just violent, he was theatrical. He was a killer with rhythm, and that's where the fan theory was born. Whenever Lamar sang, somebody was about to die. The most haunting example came with his betrayal of Slick. Slick had been with him from the start, but when Lamar smelled doubt, that loyalty meant nothing. He cornered Slick while he was packing to leave town, and instead of yelling or fighting, Lamar sang. Softly, eerily, he crooned, "You can't stop the rain." The camera didn't blink. Lamar sang while plunging a knife into Slick's body, note after note, until the floor was covered in blood. It wasn't just murder, it was performance art, and it branded Lamar as something beyond human. He was nightmare fuel.
And you can't stop the rain.
But to truly make him a monster, the writers pushed him past even the darkest codes of the street. Lamar killed Darius, the teenage boyfriend of Meech's little sister Nicole. It was a shocking move. Not even seasoned gangsters crossed into killing kids. The real Layton Simon would later admit that moment almost broke him. Seeing himself fictionalized as someone who would stab a child, it bothered him. Because it wasn't just dark, it was inhuman. The show layered more chaos on top. Lamar terrorized Monique, kidnapped his supposed daughter Zoe, and even tried to use her as leverage against Meech.
You Meech and Terry's mom?
I am.
Your boys, they hurt me really bad.
Every step of his arc was designed to strip away his humanity and make him feel like a shadow creeping through Detroit, untouchable and unstoppable. Season 1 closed with the Flannery brothers striking back. Meech, with help from Kato, lured Lamar into a trap at a repair shop. Guns went off, and Meech shot him down. For most TV villains, that's where the story ends. But Lamar was different. In Season 2, he came back from the dead, or close to it. He'd been hidden in a hospital under a false name by the corrupt Detective Bryant. When Lamar woke up, it was like a horror movie. He wasn't a man anymore. He was vengeance personified. He killed Tiny and Saki with shocking brutality. He stalked Meech, ambushed him, and even dressed as a doctor to finish him off in the hospital. But perhaps the darkest moment of his arc was the colostomy bag scene. After being shot, Lamar carried the bag with him, and in one of television's most disturbing sequences, he used it as a weapon, forcing an enemy to eat from it. It wasn't just violence, it was humiliation, degradation, a new low even for him. His madness eventually consumed Monique. When Lamar discovered she was working with Meech to set him up, his rage exploded. He strangled her to death in her own home. That act finally broke Meech. Killing Lamar wasn't enough. Meech wanted to destroy him piece by piece, so instead of pulling the trigger, he got Lamar hooked on crack. The final shot of Season 2 showed Lamar wandering under a bridge, twitching, broken, singing to himself like a ghost of the man he once was. That image was haunting. It was a villain's downfall, unlike anything else on TV. But Lamar's legend was too strong to stay buried. Season 4 brought him back, this time sober, standing in a rehab center, admitting to his group that his greatest addiction wasn't drugs, it was revenge. And that's what carried him into his last war.
That revenge, that's what really brought me to my knees. But I beat my addiction before my addiction could beat me.
He allied with B. Mickey, another BMF outcast, plotting against Meech. But betrayal defined Lamar's story from the start, and this was no different. Their alliance collapsed into a bloody three-way shootout with Detective Bryant. B. Mickey was killed, Lamar was riddled with bullets, and yet the writers still refused to give him closure. Was he finally dead? Even they wouldn't confirm it. That ambiguity was the perfect ending for a character like Lamar Silas, a villain so powerful, so unforgettable, that even death couldn't contain him. But here's the truth. Lamar Silas is a creation. Layton Simon was real, and his story wasn't built in a writer's room. It was written in blood on the streets of Detroit. His war with Big Meech and BMF wasn't about scripts. It was about survival, betrayal, and tragedy. That's where the fiction ends and the real beast begins. On TV, Lamar Silas was built as a boogeyman, an unstable monster who killed without limits.
I'm a good leader, so I got good people that follow.
We also had to worry about Layton every 5 minutes. You know, like the boogeyman is coming. Layton's a boogeyman. He gonna come.
But when you strip away the fiction, you find a man whose story wasn't about psych wards and random killings. It was about blood, grief, and a war that grew out of real tragedies. The first thing to know is simple. Layton, the beast. Simon is alive and well. He didn't die strung out under a bridge, and he wasn't gunned down in some cinematic shootout. He served his time, came back to Detroit, and today he works as a youth advocate, trying to keep kids from walking the same path he once did. And the second thing, in his own words, most of what you saw on BMF was cartoonist.
You know, he's like a cartoon character to me, man.
The show paints Lamar as a man fresh out of a mental institution. That never happened. Simon flatly denies ever being institutionalized. What was true is that after his brother was murdered, the grief was so heavy that people assumed he had lost his mind. They thought I was crazy, he said. But in his world, you didn't call the police. You held it in, you dealt with it yourself. His introduction to violence came long before Meech, long before the streets labeled him a beast. At just 8 years old, he faced 2 intruders who broke into his family home, demanding drugs and cash while beating his mother. With a shotgun in his hands, young LAYTON was ready to pull the trigger. Only his mother's desperate pleas stopped him. He would later call that his first gangster moment, the day he learned what it felt like to carry life and death in his hands. By his teens, he was fully in the game. This was Detroit in the 70s, a city crumbling from factory closings, crime rising as fast as the unemployment lines. LAYTON learned under a local figure named Harold Stinson, a man who taught him how to move product, handle crews, and survive in a city where hesitation meant death. By 15, he had already bought a Lincoln Town car with street money without even having a license to drive it. But his most defining battles didn't come from chasing money or corners. They came from family, and that's where his story collides with Big Meech. On the show, Lamar's war with Meech looks like a turf fight. He comes home, wants his corner back, and chaos follows. In reality, Simon says it wasn't about corners at all. It was about blood. The spark was the murder of his brother, Elvis, in 1987. During that shootout, Simon says he shielded himself with a young Big Meech, grabbing him so the shooter wouldn't fire.
How Big Meech got into it when my brother got shot, he ran past me when the shooting started, and I grabbed him. You know, and I had him for a shield, and the guy wouldn't shoot me. But when my brother was coming around the corner, they was after my brother, and that's when they shot him.
When Elvis died, Simon heard Meech bragging afterward, using the death as fuel for his own reputation. For Simon, that wasn't business, it was disrespect.
I stay right down the street. Take your somewhere else and party. You know, but that was like, yeah, I'm on LAYTON turf. We up here having a good goddamn time. So you got it lit up.
Then came the second blow. His 10-year-old nephew was beaten to death. And once again, Simon says Meech ran his mouth about it. That was the moment the war crossed a line. My brother's dead, my nephew's dead. What do I gotta sit down for? He recalled when asked about a proposed peace meeting. This wasn't about a truce, it was about vengeance. The streets remember the climax. One night, Simon spotted Meech and a crew of 30 deep at a Coney Island restaurant, just blocks from his home. To Simon, it was pure disrespect. Meech flaunting his power on his doorstep.
That's basically, that was, what he did was like disrespected me, you know what I'm saying?
So he went home, armed himself, and came back. He says he fired 18 rounds into Meech's Jeep. Meech ducked under the dashboard, but Simon claims one bullet still caught him in the neck. That shooting, according to Simon and Detroit street lore, is what forced Big Meech to leave the city and set up shop in Atlanta. On BMF, Meech leaves Lamar strung out, humiliated, and broken. In real life, Simon insists it was the opposite. He was the one who ran Meech out of Detroit, and this is where worse becomes complicated. The fictional Lamar was terrifying because he had no rules. He killed children, beat women, and betrayed everyone who loved him. But LAYTON Simon insists his code was different. If anybody that I get interfered with, I'm coming after them. Not their mama, not their wives, he says. He denies ever harming women or children. In fact, he once ran boxing and baseball teams for kids in his neighborhood, trying to give them something better than the streets. Still, his reality was brutal. His life was driven not by theatrics or by a need to sing before a killing, but by grief, anger, and the weight of family losses that no TV script could capture. And when he's asked about one of Lamar's most iconic moments, the chilling singing of "You Can't Stop the Rain," Simon won't give a straight answer. He just smiles and pleads the fifth. Some legends, it seems, are best left unanswered, but every legend has to end somewhere, and the way a story closes often decides how it will be remembered. In television, villains rarely ride into the sunset. They burn out usually in a blaze of violence, addiction, or betrayal. And that's exactly how Lamar Silas's tale was written to close. On BMF, Lamar's final chapter plays out like the fall of a mythical beast. After dodging death more times than seemed humanly possible, his luck finally runs out in season 4. Betrayed by B. Mickey, caught in a shootout with a crooked detective, Lamar kills one enemy but is riddled with bullets himself. He collapses in the chaos, his fate sealed, or so it seems. The showrunner described him as a man who had already lived 9 lives, and this was the 10th. Still, even then, she left the faintest trace of doubt. You never know until you see the body in a coffin and buried. It was poetic in the TV sense. A monster whose reign of terror ends in the only way audiences would accept, through violent death. That finality gave viewers the satisfaction of justice, the moral balance restored. Lamar, the villain, exits stage left in a hail of bullets. But outside the world of scripted drama, endings are rarely that clean. And that's where the legacy of the real Layton the Beast Simon forces us to reconsider what worse really means. For Simon, the end of his street career didn't come with gun smoke and slow motion collapse. It came with steel bars and years of reflection. Prison, not a bullet, became his turning point. And when he eventually walked back into Detroit, it wasn't to reclaim corners or reignite wars, it was to give back.
Well, in 1967, the Detroit riots happened. Do you remember when those riots actually popped off?
Yeah, I remember when they popped off. I believe I was around by 8 or 9 then. People was breaking in the stores. Basically, it was people that we didn't like.
Now in his mid-60s, Layton Simon spends his days not plotting revenge, but mentoring kids who stand at the same crossroads he once faced. He tells them about the life he lived without glorifying it. He doesn't dress up the fast money or the power. He talks about the funerals, the betrayals, the weight of watching his own family buried. To reinforce that mission, Simon built something tangible, Made in Plain, a clothing brand he uses not just to make money, but to fund youth programs and community work. It's his way of balancing the scale, giving back to the very city he once helped poison. For a man once called the Beast, his second act is all about planting seeds of life, not death.
I spent majority of my time with kids. You know, I had a boxing team, baseball team. You know, a lot of kids that I mentored end up being politicians.
This is where the contrast between fiction and reality cuts deepest. Lamar Silas was written as a creature of chaos. His death was the only logical ending. But Layton Simon's story shows that chaos doesn't always end in a coffin. Sometimes it evolves. Sometimes the worst people you've heard about grow into the ones warning others not to follow. Simon would later say, "I was even praised for always loving children and being around them."
My man wasn't no kid, but like I said, you know, Roy Gamble ended up being a vice president of a local 600, and then ended up being the regional president. You know what I'm saying? You know Roy Gamble?
I heard of him.
If you do, look it up. You know what I'm saying? Even though he wasn't hanging with me, and you know what I'm saying? I'm like, Roy, you don't want none of that, man. You know, I don't want you with me.
And that forces the bigger question. What makes a story truly worse? On television, Lamar's brutality shocked us. He smothered a child. He strangled a woman he once loved. He sang menacingly before killing. These were acts designed to make your stomach turn, to create a villain audiences couldn't ignore. It was horror packaged as entertainment. But reality has a different kind of horror. The kind you don't walk away from when the credits roll. Layton Simon's pain wasn't scripted, it was lived. His brother was murdered. His 10-year-old nephew was beaten to death. These weren't plot twists, they were funerals. And unlike a TV monster who kills for spectacle, Simon's violence was born out of grief and bound to the unforgiving street code of Detroit in the crack era. That pain, the kind that breaks families and reshapes entire neighborhoods, is the real nightmare. And yet, the most unexpected twist in Simon's legacy is not another act of violence, but the act of choosing peace. That's something television rarely shows, because redemption is messy, complicated, and not nearly as cinematic as a bloody shootout. But in life, it's often the harder and more profound ending. Layton Simon doesn't claim to be a saint. He admits to the destruction he helped cause. He carries regret for the kids he saw follow the same path, many of whom never made it out. And that's precisely why his voice matters now. When he tells a young man that the drug game leads nowhere but prison or death, it isn't an empty warning. It's backed by the weight of a life that lived both sides of that truth. In the end, BMF gave audiences a villain to fear and then killed him off for closure. But Detroit has to live with the real history. And in that history, the man behind the character still walks its streets, transformed. So which is worse? The answer depends on what lens you use. If you measure by sheer brutality, television's Lamar will always seem more terrifying. But if you measure by impact on families, on neighborhoods, on generations of young people, the real story is heavier. Because it's not fiction, it happened, and its echoes still linger. Maybe that's the ultimate twist. The fictional monster met his end in a spray of bullets, forever frozen as the boogeyman of a hit series. But the real Layton Simon lived to see a different ending. Not death, not a bridge, not a fade to black. Instead, redemption. And that's something no script could have written better.